The Season 1 finale of the Book of Boba Fett is finally here, and it did not disappoint, pulling together all of the plot threads that we've seen being formed over the course of 6 weeks now. The finale episode culminated in the titular bounty hunter Boba facing off against not only the Pike Syndicate, but an old associate of his as well. While we got some glimpses into the past of the Star Wars galaxy, we also got some cool hints at what might be expected to arrive in the future, as well as a fun collection of Easter eggs and interesting details littered throughout the episode. So stick with us, weary acolytes of the galaxy, and let's dive straight into a complete, comprehensive breakdown of the first season finale of the Book of Boba Fett and what it means for the future. You heard that right, this could actually just be the first season of an entire series, as just yesterday the story broke that Temuera Morrison would be open for Mace Windu returning for a season 2 of the Book of Boba Fett, and that actually being what he desires to see the most, and a story of him and Mace Windu facing off, but we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the video. Now though, let's begin our breakdown for the Book of Boba Fett finale. We open on the ruins of the Sanctuary bombing, which was orchestrated by the Pikes as the first indication of an all-out war between themselves and Fett. And while Boba, Fennec, and Din Djarin all agree to make this the final point of their stand as a message to the people of Mos Espa, Cad Bane has his own affairs to deal with here. As we next follow Cad Bane as he has a meeting with the leader of the Pikes and the Mokshais, who is presumed to be off-world as they discuss the matter of Boba Fett, revealing that it was indeed the Pike Syndicate who orchestrated the slaughter of the Tuskens and the framing of the Nikto speederbike gang, setting up the grounds for their final showdown before we are once again introduced to Grogu, who arrives at Peli's shop escorted directly by R2-D2 and Luke Skywalker's X-Wing. This seems to have significant ramifications on the events of The Mandalorian Season 3, as well as the state of Luke's Jedi Academy going forward, which may confirm the previous theory that we've covered on the channel. Yesterday, it was actually confirmed that it is in fact the same Jedi temple that Luke Skywalker is constructing in the Book of Boba Fett that we see being destroyed in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, as StarWars.com actually directly chimed in and confirmed that yes, this is indeed the same location as in the sequel trilogy. Later in the episode, we learn that Grogu chose the Beskar chainmail, signifying that he has elected to follow the path of a Mandalorian after being forced to choose by Luke at the end of the last episode, and presumably it was Luke who sent R2 to return Grogu to Tatooine. We theorized before that Luke Skywalker is making the same mistakes as his predecessors on his journey toward developing into a fully fledged Jedi Master. And part of Luke Skywalker's growth is the failure to understand how the Jedi Order must evolve in the early days of his mastery if he is to overcome the same pitfalls that crippled the previous order. If this is in fact the case, then Grogu's departure from the Order could lead Luke to evolving his teachings, becoming more accepting and open to the melding of different ideologies and perspectives, as he has been known to do in Legends material. This also signifies a significant change from Luke Skywalker's Jedi Order to the previous Jedi Order, as Luke Skywalker actually offered Grogu a direct choice and an ability to choose his own fate, unlike the Jedi of old who would kidnap children and indoctrinate them as young as possible, in order to stave off the fact that these younglings ultimately had a choice to leave the Order in the first place, which is in fact a major improvement on the previous iteration of the Order. So let's give Luke credit where credit is due. Though Grogu seems to no longer follow the official way of the Jedi, he continues to use the Force to his advantage, and it's interesting to note that he is the first being in 1,000 years to walk both the path of the Mandalorian as well as the path of the Jedi, with the last known person to do both being Tar Vizsla of Mandalore, which will obviously be an integral part in the Mandalorian series moving forward. This also ensures that Din Djarin and Grogu are reunited for the 3rd season of The Mandalorian, and that Grogu will likely not be present when Ben Solo attacks Luke's Jedi Temple and slaughters his students with the help of Sidious, allowing Grogu to survive that encounter and continue being an integral player for centuries to come in the Star Wars mythos. When we later return to Boba Fett, we find out that he has divided his forces across Mos Espa in an attempt to secure as much territory as possible for the incoming Pike attack. This actually proves to be a massive misstep, as the great families of Tatooine turn their backs on Boba in favor of the Pikes, as the members of Boba's team are ambushed one by one and largely overpowered. But just before these attacks are launched, we get another insight into Cad Bane and Boba Fett's relationship, as well as what their relationship has been like over the course of the galaxy that we have yet to see. We know that the two are longtime associates, and that Bane is the senior of the two bounty hunters, and that this relationship seems to be on full display as Bane regards Fett as something of a protege of his, the same way as Cad Bane was a protege to Boba's own father, Jango Fett. Fett. As a result of this, Bane understands how to tap into Boba's unstable emotional state and cause him to behave irrationally. He pokes and prods, using the death of the Tuskens and the murder of Cad Bane to exploit Boba's emotions, while he himself remains cold and calculating, which is a staple for the character of Cad Bane, as we know from the Clone Wars as well as his depiction in the Bad Batch. After the fight breaks out around the town, we are gifted a shootout between Fett's forces and the Pike Syndicate, in a spectacle that showcases the fullest extent of both parties' power, building the power dynamic while Boba and Din seemingly face their final stand on the ashes of the Sanctuary. Here, we learn that Boba Fett is not supportive of the Mandalorian way, or at least the variation of the Mandalorian way that Din Djarin follows, though he accepts his friend and his help in spite of their differences on essentially their religion, and the two of them ultimately join together in a final stand against the Pikes. It's interesting to note that back in Attack of the Clones, we see Jango Fett remove his helmet regularly, indicating that he is not a practitioner of the same culture as Din Djarin, and does not subscribe to the way as Din Djarin does. This may also explain where Boba's adversity comes from, as well as the fact that many Mandalorians did not accept Jango as a fully formed Mandalorian, despite Jango being a foundling similar to Din. In some Mandalorian circles, they considered the Fetts to be outlaws and disgraces to the Mandalorian way. This is Boba Fett's disdain for many Mandalorians and their way on full display here, despite his primary exposure to the Mandalorian culture being through his father Jango Fett, who too, just like Din, was considered a Mandalorian foundling but ultimately decided to leave the way. Before their stand, however, the mayor's aide offers a final, more diplomatic solution, and offers the voice of Boba Fett for his terms and surrender, which ultimately Boba accepts. During negotiations, he references Obadiah, which is the planet that lies at the end of the Kessel Run and is home to the Pike species, as well as the primary source of spice from across the galaxy. We got to see an up-close look at Obadiah in both Solo: A Star Wars Story as well as in the Clone Wars animated series, though the planet itself does not make an appearance throughout the book of Boba Fett. There's also a reference to just how harmful spice is. As we mentioned in our last breakdown, spice is actually used to create death sticks, which can actually prove to be fatal and is highly addicting. Throughout the course of the series, the Twi'lek aide to the mayor, Shaiz, has been often regarded and is widely an unlikable character who many fans are not very fond of, and it seems as if the culmination of his unlikability has finally come to a head, and as a result of this, the negotiations were short. He is tasked with presenting the terms of surrender, only to find that Boba Fett has sent him out with nothing more than an insult, leaving him amidst a barren battleground, forced to berate the enemy without cover nor backup. Though he survives this encounter, the ensuing fight showcases Boba Fett in all of his glory, returning the bounty hunter to his prime and showcasing the fullest extent of his fighting capabilities as he and Din Djarin fight side by side. The two Mandalorians unite as one against the Pikes, taking hit after hit to their Beskar-plated armor and showing off their full arsenal of gadgets and weaponry before the cavalry arrives in the form of the people of Freetown, who are here to fight on behalf of their fallen marshal, Cobb Vanth. As the forces rally together for one final showdown, we are introduced to two new battle droids which are known as Scorpeneks, who sport shielded technology reminiscent of the Republic-era destroyers utilized by the Separatists during the Clone War. These Scorpeneks appear to be massive versions of basically the destroyer droid from the Clone Wars. From the Clone Wars as well, we are able to learn the best ways to combat these types of droids, and the best way to take them down we learn from Season 5 of the Clone Wars, where an Anakin Skywalker, Captain Rex, and Ahsoka Tano assist Saw Gerrera and his forces in their fight against the Separatist army. In the episode, the Jedi band together and teach the rebels the combat tactics in order to take down the droids. And one of the main strategies that they touch upon is how to combat shielding technology that protects destroyers. The shields of a destroyer droid are designed to stop high-velocity projectiles, which Din Djarin seems to notice and even comment on. Din's dialogue seems to be a direct callback to this episode of Clone Wars directly, though the band finds a different solution that was set up all the way back in episode 3. Nonetheless, Ahsoka and Anakin both figured out ways to stop these types of droids, which was rolling thermal detonators within the shields so that the thermal detonator was slow enough that it could penetrate the shield and of course explode upon entering. In episode 3 of the book of Boba Fett, the Hutt twins gifted Boba a Rancor as a sign of peace between the two parties, as Boba requested to learn how to ride the beast, which ultimately is paid off in this final episode, as the Rancor is able to overpower the first Scorpenek droid. After weakening the shield, Din Djarin is able to infiltrate with the Darksaber, as he begins to dismantle the droid before it knocks the Rancor back. This moment also showcases just how far Grogu has come in his limited training with Luke. Though it is small, Grogu is able to remove a key support joint in the droid's hinge, temporarily incapacitating it and saving Din's life, allowing the two Mandalorians to fully dismantle the droid together. This could hint at a different relationship dynamic for the third season of The Mandalorian between Grogu and Din, as instead of one protector and one protectee, their relationship may evolve into more of a partnership, as Grogu continues to develop his skills within the Force, as well as a Mandalorian foundling. If Grogu's power continues to grow and he can harness the fullest extent of his current capabilities, then perhaps Din and Grogu can work in tandem with one another much more effectively than simply leaving Din to protect a helpless Grogu. Throughout the duration of his life, Grogu has been largely defenseless, as he's been passed around from party to party without his input nor his consent. And it's largely time Grogu has grown more capable of defending himself on his own accord, and this would be a fascinating dynamic to see play out in real time in the third season of Mando. We get more evidence as to just how powerful Grogu is becoming later in the episode, but more on that in just a moment. After this encounter, we cut back to the band of rebels who are fending off the second Scorpenek droid before help ultimately arrives, and we see them band together into what seems to be a cohesive unit, with the different aspects of Tatooine coming together under one cause: the people of the city and the people that live in the more outer reaches of Tatooine, which is an interesting dynamic that the Book of Boba Fett built upon very brilliantly, I may say. The different cultures and people of Tatooine, and something that I hope is continued in Kenobi. Boba Fett and the Rancor ultimately return to dismantle the second droid, before Boba is dismounted directly by Cad Bane, who is still using his flamethrower, which was heavily showcased in the Clone Wars as well as the Bad Batch, and seems to be a staple of most bounty hunters. The two confront each other yet again, and while the Rancor goes on an agitated rampage, we learn a considerable amount about both Boba and Bane here. Not only do we learn more about their dynamic, but we learn that despite his old age and weathering physique, Cad Bane is still faster on the draw than Boba Fett. I'm really glad that they ultimately brought up how old Cad Bane is, as his species ages similar to a human, meaning that Cad Bane could conceivably be in his 70s here, or conceivably even older, and I love the idea that these are two aged bounty hunters and that they actually comment on it. Cad Bane is clearly far past his prime, but he's still a quicker draw than Boba. The standoff between the two aged bounty hunters is a callback to the unfinished episode of the Clone Wars, which has now been confirmed to be canon, as after Cad Bane is defeated, you can ultimately see the metal plating on his head, indicating that Boba and Cad Bane did have a face-off. And while Cad Bane was nearly killed and required the metal plating, he also gifted Boba Fett his iconic dent in his helmet. In the episode, we see Boba and Bane face off in a duel for the first time, and the result is bad for both of them, as they are each able to land a shot, with Bane denting Boba Fett's helmet in the process. Their previous encounter paints the two of them as equals, and largely served to pose the question of who is truly faster, with the answer finally being revealed in this week's episode to be Bane. If it weren't for the Beskar plating in his armor, Cad Bane very well would have killed Boba in this moment. And while we learn that Bane is quicker on the draw, we also learn that Boba Fett is the superior hand-to-hand combatant, as he uses his Tusken Gaffi stick to overpower his elder bounty hunter. Cad Bane once again toys with Boba's emotions, taunting him with memories of his father before we see a landmark occurrence in the Star Wars galaxy. Perhaps one of the most prominent events to take place in the series is the death of Cad Bane, who has been one of the most prolific bounty hunters in the galaxy for upwards of 20 years. Watching such an iconic character who has been a staple of Star Wars since 2009 die is a benchmark on the Star Wars timeline, and will likely serve as a permanent mark on the Star Wars timeline for years to come. However, of course, this is Star Wars and anything is possible, and we can all only hope that Cad Bane makes it out of here, even though he is very aged. I would still love to see Cad Bane return in the future, and I hope that his stay wasn't quite as short as it showed in the Book of Boba Fett. When we cut back to the Rancor's rampage, we get a deeper look at Grogu's Force abilities as he displays an ability that we've seen before. As mentioned earlier, only in this case, it's not the standard telekinetic capabilities that we see most Force users utilize, but is is a more complex ability. Grogu appears to use the Force ability known as Beast Control, as he seems to form a Force-based connection with the Rancor. While this power has been used by the likes of Obi-Wan and Anakin during the course of the Clone Wars, as well as over the course of the original trilogy, it is an ability most commonly associated in Star Wars canon with Ezra Bridger, as this was a huge part of Ezra's character in Star Wars Rebels. Ezra has an uncanny ability to communicate with living creatures through the Force, far more effectively than most Force users that we've seen, and Grogu seems to emulate this ability to ultimately calm the Rancor's rampage. Interestingly enough, one of Ezra's most prominent teachers was none other than Ahsoka Tano, who we see with Luke teaching Grogu in unison, and it's theoretically possible that she may have offered both Luke and Grogu some insight into this ability based on her experiences with both Obi-Wan and Anakin as well as Ezra. It's also important to note that Luke Skywalker has some affinity with this ability as well, but not quite on the level of Grogu or Ezra, at least not in the time of Return of the Jedi. Showing that Grogu is able to learn this in what is presumably just a few short weeks showcases just how powerful Grogu may ultimately become with the Force. As we've theorized before, Yoda's species has a huge ability to touch the Force itself, making the upper limits of Grogu's power far more than that of a common Jedi Knight. And now that Grogu is walking the path of a Mandalorian, he may be able to expand his knowledge of the galaxy without completely abandoning his mastery of the Force, especially if Luke is able to modify his objectives and his teaching styles to accommodate for different worldviews. After Fennec Shand then single-handedly assassinates the head of both the Pike Syndicate and the three Gotras, we see Boba Fett being commended for his actions around town, and it seems as if he has secured his rightful place as the new Daimyo of Tatooine. We even get a fun nod to the Melo Run fruit, which was the basis for an entire bonding episode of Rebels wherein Ezra and Zeb learn to overcome their differences and work together more effectively. And though the fruit serves as little more than a cameo, it's a fun piece of world building to acknowledge in Boba Fett. It's also interesting to note that Chrysanthemum was the only one to receive one, possibly poking fun at the events of A New Hope, wherein Chewbacca was denied a medal, while both Luke and Han were rewarded for their participation in the destruction of the first Death Star. Boba Fett also mentions that this life may not be suited for him and Fennec Shand, meaning that they likely intend to hand over the role of Daimyo to someone else, and could return to a life more akin to that of a bounty hunter. However, this is directly leading into the events of the Book of Boba Fett Season 2, which again Temu Morrison has stated that he would love to see Mace Windu return and Boba attempt to get revenge. But again, at this point in time, a Season 2 of the Book of Boba Fett is yet to be greenlit and is currently in limbo. But if there is an announcement for a Season 2, be sure to stay tuned on the channel as we will follow it in depth. The final shot before the credits roll is of Din Djarin and Grogu setting off on their next adventure, with Grogu electing to formally learn the way of the Mandalorian people while still utilizing his Force sensitivity and limited Jedi training to augment his abilities, promising to become one of the most diverse characters in the future of Star Wars under Din Djarin's guidance, now the rightful ruler of the Darksaber. These two are an absolute powerhouse. After the credits, however, we come to learn that Cobb Vanth is currently being treated in the Bacta tank and might receive some technological modifications in the near future, as one of the mods that we saw actually helped out Fennec Shand is present within Boba or Jabba's palace. This of course obviously spelling the return of his character in either Season 3 of The Mandalorian or Season 2 of the Book of Boba Fett, though where exactly Cobb Vanth appears next remains to be seen. But there you have it, my friends. That is our comprehensive breakdown for the Book of Boba Fett. I will say that this final episode, while ultimately satisfying, failed to reach the heights of the last two. I understand though that they had to follow Boba's story in the end, even though I didn't find his story particularly as intriguing as that of Luke's or Din Djarin's. I recognize that in a show called The Book of Boba Fett though, you kind of need to focus on Boba Fett. Ultimately in the end, I would give this episode a 7.5 out of 10. It doesn't quite reach the heights of the previous two episodes, but I think it ties everything together nicely. I was ultimately quite disappointed for the death of Cad Bane, and I hope that he returns to live action in the future. With that said, we got some pretty cool action in this episode, especially with the Rancor and especially with Din and Boba. I feel like a lot of this season has not had Boba Fett on full display with his abilities, and we finally got to see that in this last episode. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on this last episode and the season finale of the Book of Boba Fett? Do you think that we'll be getting a second season of Boba Fett or not? Overall, what did you think of the episode, and what would you like to see if a second season is ultimately greenlit? As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching. May the Force be with you, and I hope you have a great day.